It's a great question, my man. And it was pretty wild, intense, and surprisingly so. I wasn't really expecting things to be like how they were, but let's get into it. We'll chop up my career as a military cop. So I became an MP in the mid 2000s, and things were kind of different than they are now for MPs. Our training, your basic MP course was 6 months long. You needed to have post-secondary before you could even be considered as an MP. The selection process is pretty wild too. You'll do what's called an MPOC, or a Military Police Assessment Center. And what they do there, that's basically where your job interview happens. And it was like a 3-4 day long event. There's one-on-one interviews, there's group exercises, there's written tests, there's all kinds of shit. They even check to see how you behave socially. That's right. They check on you after hours. They actually host a party, to see what you're like. They want to know you. So the selection process was pretty wild. Moving on from that, the course itself, my basic MP course, was 6 months long, and it wasn't too intense. I mean, the PT was pretty standard for military PT. The courses were, relatively easy to consume because I already had post-secondary in this shit, as did everyone else. One of the most frustrating and difficult things on that course, though, were inspections. All right. Anybody who's been on a military course knows that inspections suck balls. I remember on my PLQ, or my combat leaders course, shit getting thrown out your fucking window. All right. You'd be second, third floor in a building, and your staff is throwing shit out that fucking window if it doesn't meet the standards. Now, as an MP, we had people doing inspections that did inspections at the detention barracks or the military prison. So their level of detail that they inspect to is insane. So there was a super high standard, and they had this idea of discipline by example. So they were out to fuck a couple of us intentionally for whatever reason they could to set an example. So there was a bit of fuckery on the course, but all in all, not too bad. But I ended up finishing first place, or top candidate, on my MP QL3. From there, I was posted to Borden, doing patrols, and I started what was called a PEP. I don't even know if they still do this anymore, but it was a probationary employment period, and it was a year long. It was 12 months. You had to do all kinds of different investigations, handle all kinds of different situations, all right? And if you did that within the year, then you would pass your PEP, and then you would be eligible to go on to a QL5. Now, the QL5 was basically a reiteration of everything you've learned on your QL3 and your PEP. All right. It lasted, I think, like 3 weeks. It wasn't anything too intense. And again, I topped that course. Now, outside of my military police training, I did a lot of civilian police training as well. I did training with CISO, or Criminal Intelligence Service Ontario, and I qualified in surveillance, or in the police world, we call it SPIN. I trained at Blackwater and used the skills I learned there on deployment in Afghanistan. I was trained at the Canadian Police College in Ottawa. I'm a qualified forensic interviewer. I'm qualified in statement analysis, shit like that. So the training and whatnot was incredible. I got to go to all these different agencies, all these different civilian units, and train and do crazy shit and be able to use it in real life as an MP. As for postings, I only had a few postings. I started off on patrols in Borden, and after about 6 months on the road, I got snagged by our National Drug Enforcement Team, which is an offshoot of the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, or our Major Crimes Unit. And I did I think it was like 3 months long. It was a drug operation called Op Broomba, and I was a plainclothes operator. I did undercover introductions. I signed up, co-handled CIs, did surveillance, all kinds of shit. It was pretty wild. There were like 3 active drug houses that we were looking at. It was, I knew that there were drugs in the military, but it wasn't until I got into the drug enforcement team that I realized how big it actually was. When all that was said and done, not long after anyways, I ended up doing a 2.5 month long tasking as the sheriff of the Army Cadet Summer Training Center in Borden. It's called Camp Blackdown. And I was the MP in charge of that area. And as a result of this, I ended up stopping a mass shooting in 2008 from happening in relation to that camp. Now, there's easily, 1,000 people there on a quiet day, all right? And I'm just one person, so I've got to deal with all these people. But yeah, this guy he threatened to kill a bunch of people. He went home to get his guns. I had the York Region ERT unit or tactical unit involved. I worked with them. We got the guy. He did like 5 years or some shit. So that was pretty wild. Once my tasking there had finished up, I ended up doing court case management. So it was my responsibility to handle all of our criminal matters at the civilian courthouse in Barrie. So that's where I worked, was at the courthouse in Barrie. I didn't work, I had an office on the base, but I was rarely there. But I had to make sure all of our paperwork, warrants, informations, all of that shit was correct. Bail briefs, all that kind of stuff was done. I had to liaise with the judges and JPs, with the lawyers, all kinds of shit. It was a busy job. I didn't really enjoy it much. It was civilian attire. But that's how I met my wife anyways. So I'm kind of thankful that I had that job. Now, I was in that position for about a year, and that coming summer, I was going to be the sheriff of Camp Krusty again, that cadet camp. But there was a call that came out for a specialized unit in the military police called MPSS, and they needed somebody to go to Afghanistan for at least 6 months. Could be longer, but at least 6 months. The call went out all across Canada. Me and like 2 other people applied. I got the job, and that's when I started my training with Blackwater. Now, this deployment to Afghanistan wasn't, your typical deployment. It wasn't part of ISAF. There was no protection. It was a small team. There were like 6 of us. Now, we worked with a bunch of expats, mostly British and British Gurkhas. The expats, the British ones, the solid British ones, were para and ex-SAS. But there was also CSIS there that we dealt with from time to time, dealt with CIA from time to time, all different militaries, different dignitaries, all kinds of shit. It was a pretty cool job, and I did that for 12 months. So I did back-to-back rotations in Afghanistan. I stayed on for another 6 months. Now, when I was done those last 2 tours, I was posted back to CFB Borden, but I didn't go into patrols. I went into their general investigation section, or street crimes. And through there, I ended up heading up a CSAM operation. CSAM is child sexual assault material. And so I led a 7-month-long operation dealing with this and a specific person. There was undercover work involved, surveillance work involved, all kinds of shit. So, my career was wild. I dealt with everything from petty crime to sudden deaths, sexual assaults, narcotics, you name it. And I got all kinds of wild training, qualifications, and experiences out of it. Now, I understand that not everybody's career in the military police is going to go like that, but that's just how mine went. Now, ultimately, I would medically retire from the forces, but I finished up in the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, which is our major crimes unit. Thanks for asking.